What's your F this I quit story? Story 1. I was a truck driver working a regional route that required me working nights. So basically, I would drive all through the night, deliver a load, sleep through the day, and take a load back to my original place the next night. The thing is, sleeping during the day at a warehouse where yard dogs, the guys that move trailers around a lot of the warehouse with little tractor deals, were constantly moving shit around, knocking into my truck, and oftentimes literally waking me up to move my truck. I was barely getting any sleep, and the only time I had to ever get a good night's rest was during the weekend. So driving to my first delivery, I told my manager I'm taking an extra day off because I'm exhausted and have to get a few days of sleep. I was literally getting maybe 3 to 4 hours of solid sleep a day, and energy drinks were worthless at this point. They gave me the go-ahead. I dropped my delivery, slept as best as I could at the warehouse, and picked up the load to take back with a message from my managers telling me to have a good weekend and rest up. When I was about an hour and a half away from my destination, after driving all night for about 8 hours reaching pure exhaustion, I get a message saying, "Never mind, we need you to work this weekend." Mind you, I know this stuff happens, and you sometimes have to pick up the slack of other employees at times. Things happen. I get it, and 99% of the time I'm all for helping out other employees and my managers if they need it. But this was about the third time this happened. I haven't had a good night's sleep in 3 weeks at this point, and I kept trying to call my managers or anyone who would answer me, but it was the weekend, and no one would respond to their messages or phone calls. I was literally being ignored, and I just snapped. Luckily, the demand for truckers is massive. I mean, I get texts nonstop asking if I'm in the market because the company needs drivers. I haven't even been in the industry for 2 years currently, and my phone still gets blown up with calls and texts asking if I want to drive again. So literally, all I did was call one of the numbers that would contact me constantly, and immediately was hired after 5 minutes of talking on the phone. Sent in a message saying I quit and good luck. Funny enough, then they started responding to my messages and tried calling me. I know it was probably a move to F them over, and I normally would never do that, but I just broke and could not take it anymore. Story 2. Got a summer job while I was in high school at a place that made fiberglass tanks. I was told I'd be doing groundskeeping and yard work. Figured I'd scored an easy game of bombing around on a ride-on mower and whatnot. No pee. The first day I showed up in a shirt and jeans, I was told the yard equipment wasn't ready, so they had me cut raw fiberglass for 8 hours with an X-Acto knife and no pee. Being a stupid kid, I didn't immediately quit and did this for 3 more days. At least after the first day, I'd brought my own gloves and long sleeve shirt. However, on said fate, day 3 was when they were doing tank coatings. So about 10 feet away from me are 2 dudes in full PPE. We're talking coveralls, rubber gloves, glasses, face shields, and respirators. 10 feet away from me, in a poorly ventilated room, spraying the exterior of a tank with presumably fiberglass coating. I only made it a few hours before having to go to the bathroom to puke. Was told to quit being a weak and go back out on the floor, so I fortunately had a moment of not being a stupid kid and said I quit and walked home. Both parents were mad when I told them I quit. Joke's on them though, because a few years later that company killed 2 dudes. A guy asphyxiated while working inside one of the tanks, and the person that tried to rescue him also ended up dying. Whole place got shut down permanently. Story 3. I worked for a group home. We had a difficult group of residents, but the company made things so much worse. Every resident was 14 to 22 years old. They had moderate mental development delays, 65 to 75 IQ range. They all had a psychiatric disorder, from severe ADHD to schizophrenia, and they had also all been convicted of a violent sexual crime. I worked the 3rd shift. My normal hours were 10:30 p.m. to 9 a.m., 4 days a week. About 6 months into working there, they did a massive layoff. They went down to bare minimum staff to student ratio each shift, with nobody extra to call in if needed. That meant if someone called out, a person on the previous shift was forced. It got to the point where I was being forced 3 out of 4 shifts per week, and not just a few hours. I was working from 10:30 p.m. to around 4:30 p.m. the next day, and still had to come in for my following shift. I had an hour commute each way. So I get home at 5:30 p.m. from a 16-hour shift and have to leave the house again 4 hours later. Managed that for about a month. Then one morning I was told at the last minute I was being forced. Told them I was fucking done and walked out. That month took a huge toll on my mental health. Swear it took me like a year to recover. Story 4. After taking a few days off work while my father was having a brain tumor removed and still checking emails and attending conference calls from the hospital, my boss gave me a new project. On a Thursday afternoon, she gave me a Monday morning deadline for a project that would take 6 to 8 days to complete. I worked 16 hours a day to get it done. When we met on Monday, she asked how my weekend was. I worked all weekend. Then she asked if I got to visit my dad in the hospital. No, I didn't get a chance because I worked all weekend. A couple weeks later, she pulled me into a meeting and said, "I feel like you were resentful because you had to work, and I feel like I was really good when your dad was sick. Maybe you're just tired. Are you tired?" She'd also make comments when I would leave the office on time, not early on time. "It's great that you just get up and go when your day is over. Like I have to go because I have a daughter, but you don't have any kids and you just leave at the end of the day." Yeah, B, I don't live here. I don't go home and sit in a dark room counting the hours until I get to come back here. I'm also not curing cancer. Nothing we do here matters to anyone outside of here. I give you 100% when I'm here. But when my day is done, it's fucking done. I no longer work there. Story 5. I was doing a manager's job without the title or pay. I was asked to train all of our new seasonal staff without any additional pay. I was pulling 12-hour days without being paid for all 12 hours. Then I had my yearly evaluation. She gave me an average rating, and when I asked what I could improve so that I could get a pay raise next year, she said there was nothing I could do. Let slip that they would only be giving an exceed rating to one person per store. Performance didn't matter. The minimum wage also happened to be bumped this year. I was making more because I had been there for 5 years. But we were informed that those of us who had been there and were earning the new minimum wage would continue to just earn the same amount. Meaning a person who had started a week prior was now making the same as someone who had been there for 10 years. Then one day, my alarm didn't go off, so I missed my first day in 5 years. I panicked and called my assistant manager and told him. I got to work. We had just hired a new manager. She toured the store with some higher-ups. She took that opportunity to chew me out in front of them. I apologized profusely for being late, but that wasn't good enough. She decided to screen at me for only telling my assistant manager and not telling her. I called the store. He picked up. He told me he would tell her. She decided she didn't like me, so she cut my hours in half. The only reason why I kept the job after all of that was because they were still giving me full-time hours and I knew I wouldn't get that anywhere else. Well, if they're just going to give me 20 hours a week, F it. So I handed in my 2 weeks to a manager I had worked with and loved. New manager took personal offense to this too, and started talking shit to everyone who would listen. So instead of working out my last 2 weeks of shifts, I just stopped coming in. I was going back to school anyway. I didn't need their reference. I heard that a month later there was a mass exodus, so glad I got out when I did. Story 6. I worked at a well-known pizzeria in my city for a while when I was younger. Definitely put up with a fair amount of shit for the year and a half I worked there. Terrible managers, lazy co-workers for pretty much minimum wage. Well, a couple months before I was planning on leaving to go to school in a different city, they were having an issue with hiring and firing new people because they kept hiring anyone with a pulse regardless of how many brain cells were between their ears. Back in January, I had requested the time for spring break off, as I was planning a surf trip out to California. Had the time approved in writing, and that was that. Fast forward to March, they hired and fired 3 people in the same week, so it became apparent staffing was an issue. The schedule came out for the week I had requested off, and was surprised to see myself on the schedule almost every day that week. I approached the store manager with the schedule and my written approval of time off request, and was like, "What the F, dude?" He then proceeded to tear up my request in front of me, and said, "We don't have enough people right now, so you're gonna have to make some sacrifices. You're just going to have to deal with it. That week was about 3 weeks out, so I made a snap decision then and there and replied, "No, you're gonna have to make the sacrifice. I'm giving you my 2 weeks. I've had this trip planned for months and you can't even ask if it's okay to cancel my trip." The last 2 weeks go the smoothest I've ever worked there, that manager trying everything to get me to stay, and I keep saying no while he decides to retaliate in small, irritating ways. I'd had enough and decided I'm not going in on my last day to close the shop. I'm starting my spring break a day early. About 10 minutes into the start of my shift, I got a call from said manager asking where I was. So I tell him, "Oh, I'm on I-10 heading west right now." "Well, when are you going to get here?" "Dude, if you haven't gotten it yet, I'm not coming in." He starts going off about how he's going to have to close and work extra since he opened the store that morning, etc. I said to him, "Sounds like you're gonna have to make some sacrifices and just deal with it. Remember that. I'll be in when I get back to pick up my last check in 2 weeks," and hung up. Definitely the most satisfying way I've ever quit. ED2. Updated for better readability. Story 7. I was a manager at a company where the executives were ineffective. I worked 60 hours a week most of the time and had to do all of my director's duties because he didn't understand our systems. The work environment was also pretty hostile and passive-aggressive. People cried on the job daily in other departments, slightly less in mine. Managers and staff would snap at other departments the same way the executives did because of the stress. I tried to take care of my department and make sure they weren't being abused or taken advantage of. I had 3 days leave for a death in the family, but had to work every day from home and the funeral itself. It was especially vexing because it was to redo the same thing every day that my boss would just forget to complete and need done again the next day. I brought this to his attention, as well as all the other issues, and he said he would try to do better. Months went by and it got worse. Finally, our team sat down with him and told him things needed to change. I told him that the environment was more hostile and aggressive than ever, and the team agreed. He told me that was my perception and we needed an attitude change, then left for a meeting, which I had provided him the data for. I cleared out my desk and left and quit with HR. For me, the kicker